Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the British Lancaster pistol, specifically a 4-barreled example with a double-action trigger. There were, of course, other configurations, but we'll cover all of that after a quick trip to the lightbox. The example I have here today is just over 10.5 inches long and weighs just shy of 2.5 pounds. That weight probably comes from the fact that we have 4 distinct barrels, each with their own chamber, which means this is a 4-shot pistol that has no magazine. Each chamber, of course, taking the .476 centerfire cartridge, more appropriately known as the Enfield Mark III cartridge. Now, if you're thinking, how do they do it? An entire documentary in depth every other week, from the common to the strange. Well, it's actually thanks to people just like yourself. Little donations every month that add up to a big heap of work. So thank you for contributing. Additional support for this show comes from, thankfully, our already favorite and highly recommended Universal Gun Oil, a red and green can, no matter how big or small, Ballistol. And as such, we've been doing a little history on this product. Last time we left off on Hitler's pre-war tummy ache. Well, it's worth mentioning that the German army found no faults with the Do-All oil and kept it in service all the way through 1945. The only thing that put it out of service was the nation being split right down the middle. Even so, we're going to see that this product managed to soldier on by its lonesome without government support. You can't beat something so simple, so safe, and so reliable. On a more personal note, I want to thank our audience for how they've treated our sponsor, because very recently I spoke to our representative in person, and he was gushing about how kind you all have been, both in your emails and in person, saying directly to Ballistol, thank you for preserving firearms history, for making this material available to everyone, and of course, for the product being safe on the gun itself. Alright, let's get into the history. Now, in order to understand the Lancaster pistol, we have to first establish a little bit of background. This is an elephant, and on its back is what's called a Howdah. The British really loved this setup for hunting exotic game, most famously, tigers. These giant cats don't always want to be hunted, and sometimes would charge both the elephant and its riders. This created a demand for a short-ranged, high-power backup pistol. An entire class of handguns was born. Large bore, large powder capacity. These were essentially double rifles with their stocks cut off. Unpleasant to fire, but a confidence booster all the same. Once introduced, the Big Howdah pistol carved a niche for itself in the British psyche and would remain in production by various makers in various forms for nearly a century. This meant that they had to evolve to keep up with the times, eventually taking on things like centerfire cartridges. The Howdah also made the jump from sport to martial use. Many officers felt that a double pistol, or perhaps even more shots than that, would be better than a percussion single-shot pistol. This was particularly aided by the British hesitancy on adopting a revolver, especially the Army, who by the late 1870s were only just starting to replace some of their single-shot percussion pistols with the Navy's Adams revolvers. While this represented a jump straight past percussion, rimfire, and centerfire single-action revolvers, in an era of rapid features advancement, it was already obsolete, especially because, for its large bulk, the Adams had a fairly weak cartridge. The War Office's response was to have Enfield assemble this, the Mark I, an amalgamation of theoretically good ideas that was ultimately less than the sum of its parts. The deficiencies of the Enfield revolver and its Mark II attempted improvement left a lot of room for the commercial market to exploit the confusion. Thanks to the long delay in adoption of a revolver and the poor showing of the first official Army model, plenty of officers were still in deep doubt about this whole rolling cylinder claptrap. Their complaints? Revolvers were prone to jamming, mostly because of the revolving cylinder itself, which could clog or foul. The unsealed mechanism also needed more frequent maintenance to prevent such buildup from external material. Revolvers were generally bulky with many protrusions, meaning that they could snag on clothing or leather. Attempting a large caliber, like .577, meant making something too unwieldy for personal carry when a cylinder was involved. That unsealed breech, by the way, meant a lot of power was lost into the cylinder gap. This not only dropped the speed of the bullet, but it also meant that shooting, say, rested across your arm or next to a friend of yours could be a bit risky to the skin because of blow-by. All of these problems, however, could be solved with a breech-loading pistol, though most of those at this time were single shot. A handful of manufacturers figured out ways to incorporate multiple barrels, creating effectively breech-loading Howdahs. The most successful of these came from a firm known as Charles Lancaster. Named for its founder, a famed London barrel maker who started his own business in 1811, in 1826 Lancaster began producing complete firearms, moving to 151 New Bond Street. Renowned for his quality, Lancaster guns became prized favorites even for the royalty. In 1847, Charles Sr. passed away, leaving the firm to his sons. Charles William Lancaster took the lead. Brother Alfred would actually strike out on his own in 1860. But Jr. actually took the helm rather successfully, further building the prestige of the family firm. In 1850, Charles William received a British patent for a unique form of rifling resistant to black powder fouling and easy to keep free of rust. Well, I say rifling, but it was more the production thereof. This was oval bore, which had actually been patented before, but Lancaster's patent was tightened down on exactly how to machine it and machine it well. An oval bore rifle has two opposing twist grooves, which are then rounded at the edges, so much so that it can be difficult to make them out. You'd be forgiven for thinking an oval bore was actually a smooth bore without measuring it. This nearly smooth bore did a couple of things. It was very hard to foul up, easy to clean, and it still allowed you to use shot cartridges, which could be popular. Still, it did impart rotation to bullets, enough to provide for good shooting. Oval bore would be a hallmark of Lancaster firearms for decades to come. In 1870, Charles William took an apprentice, Henry Alfred Alexander Thorne. Born in Kensington to a coach-building family, Thorne apprenticed at Lancaster at the age of 16. In 1878, Charles William passed away, and Thorne bought up the business. Unlike so many others, though, he didn't change the name on the sign. He knew that Charles Lancaster was a legacy, and under Thorne, it grew even more famous. In terms of public marketing, he basically abandoned his own name in favor of Lancaster's fame. In 1889, he even published a book, The Art of Shooting, under the pseudonym Charles Lancaster. Thorne also didn't simply rest on that old reputation. He looked to grow it and developed a number of improvements to the products. For today's episode, we care most about his patent of 1881 for multi-barreled firearms using a singular lockwork. The images and text focus on long arms, multi-barreled shotguns and rifles, but make passing mention of pistols. This lockwork actually uses an unusual barrel-shaped set of cam tracks which were indexed by a fixed pin on an extension. This, with some refinement, would find its way into our pistol today. During 1881 or perhaps 1882, the first pistols built on this patent were released to the commercial market. These were large-framed, square-topped, double-action pistols with 4 barrels. The opening lever, set on the left side of the frame, worked an internal latch. They also had floated firing pins, one for each chamber, which would be smacked in sequence. Thorne seems to have further improved the design fairly quickly, making the early pattern hard to find. We don't have one here today. More common is this, a slightly smaller framed, more ergonomic 4-barrel pistol, which emerged about a year later. It's probably best if I just go ahead and show this to you instead of trying to explain it all in the ether. This is a beautiful looking handgun. I mean, it's very plain on the outside, definitely no snag risk there, and I mean, who isn't excited about those 4 barrels? But what are we actually dealing with here? Well, we have a double action trigger. We'll see more on that in a moment. And we have a latching top brake mechanism, just like a top brake revolver. As a matter of fact, if we look at our latch, for those of you familiar with our Tranter 1879 episode, this guy's no surprise. We just go ahead and pop that, and yeah, that releases our lug. We have it on both sides. This was not the original mechanism. I don't have an example of one here today, but to my knowledge, it was a sort of T-bar system set up here in the top that would have looked a lot like, maybe some of you might recognize the Mossberg Brownie, although operated from the rear with a lever. What these guys do is it allows us to go ahead and lift and open, and being a top brake pistol, this, no surprise, has an integral extractor that's going to lift out all of our cartridges before going over center, and then it's going to snap down in place and allow us to load more. Now, it's a little hard to see, and we'll probably have to just do it again in our animation, but as you can probably make out, the way the extractor works is that there is a spring-loaded star, and a finger. As a matter of fact, let me flip this around. Looking more closely at that extractor, we can see that it's a 4-corner star like you'd expect. Spring-loaded, it wants to go popping back into that housing in the center of those 4 barrels. And we have a lever. Look at that. That lever is sitting on an over-travel stop in the hinge. We can see a little bit better from underneath in a second, but it doesn't want to go until it gets all the way back and then goes over center and releases. Just from the underside, we'll see that again. She pulls until she gets compressed out. Oop, bit hard to see. Yeah, it's hidden down in there. This is going to be better to see in our animation. I just wanted you guys to be aware of it and that it's a system that we've actually seen on other top rake revolvers before. And just for a better look at that. And oh yeah, okay, good. And then of course we have 4 distinct firing pins set here. As a matter of fact, the wording, we can see it's marked Patent Charles Lancaster. And there's our firing pin. It's going to go all the way around in a circle. I don't want to dry fire it too much because, frankly, this uses an auto-rebounding hammer mechanism that I don't like snapping around too much. We'll get a look at it with a little help from some dummy cartridges. With the help of some dummies, we can actually see how this would work. There's a little rubber in the back of these fake cartridges. We'll close this up, pull our trigger, boom, and then we'll check where it indexed to. Now, this is going to want to extract, but I don't want it to. There we go. And check it out. We're now in the next position, and we'll keep on going around as needed for all of those rounds. Once the gun is empty, by the way, she does extract, although not with much gusto with loaded cartridges, but it's enough to get them on out. Well, except for that guy. Woe be unto thee who tries to slowly extract a loaded cartridge on one of these old initial extractor guns. Now, in order to appreciate this simple double action trigger pull where we just pull the trigger until the gun fires as many times as necessary, you're going to need to go inside. A single screw is all it takes to get under these grips. Go ahead and get both of them out of the way. That's a fine piece of wood, isn't it? All right, get these guys out. And you know what? Let's zoom in a little bit. All right, we have the dummies in place. We have a double action trigger that I'm sure you guys are dying to see, so let me go ahead and fire one. Boom. And we saw our firing pin rotate into position and the hammer drop. Now, if you ignore this drum for a second, the back half of this is just a revolver as we've known it. We have a DAO, essentially, a double action only, with a trigger that has a return spring and some pressure on technically we have what I would consider to be like a strut at the back or a pawl. This thing is pushing back on a notch on a hammer. The hammer, however, has a really complicated firing pin. This thing goes back, cocks, comes forward, smacks. It's a hammer. This guy is just a weird, funky system that's designed to rotate the firing pin that is attached to the hammer 1/4 turn every time we pull the trigger. At the back, before we move on to how the drum works, we have a mainspring. And the mainspring works exactly as you'd expect. It goes ahead and pulls up on the stirrup that launches the hammer forward. At the bottom side, it's a little more difficult to see, but we have an auto rebounder. This will be familiar to those of you who saw our Webley number 4 episode, in that as we go ahead and fire the system, you may see it start to flex a little bit at the bottom there. Whenever this guy goes forward, it's going to over travel slightly. The bottom of the hammer is going to slap this. It's probably not even easy to see without high speed, but it's going to immediately put counter pressure on the hammer so that even as the firing pin is going over center and striking the cartridge, it's going to head and spring back just slightly. It's an auto rebound, which means that the firing pin sets back just enough to no longer be resting on a primer. Very important if you want to snap this action closed with live rounds. For anyone curious, this spring is providing most of the trigger return, and then that spring down in there is putting back pressure on that strut. All right, that's the revolvery part of it. What is going on with this firing pin? Well, it has a one-side lobe with actually a screw replaceable firing pin. So actually, if something was going to break on this gun, that's not the worst thing to have to service. And then we have these cam tracks built into a drum, and they work against this pin off an extension of the frame. The pin causes this guy to rotate 1/4 turn every time it comes back, and then this track here allows it to go straight forward to smack the next primer. So 1/4 turn, forward, quarter turn, forward. You know, as complicated as it seems, it should be familiar to those of you who've seen a Fosbury or a Mauser zigzag, and yet it's been reduced and put down on just the firing pin. It's frankly kind of brilliant how you can get all that on the end of a hammer, and the rest of it is actually fairly straightforward lockwork that we've seen before, just not as all jumbled up as this. For those of you curious about those markings on the side of the frame, yes, they are Japanese, and they are a registration. In this case, it's marked for the year 1894. Sadly, I am not familiar with the characters for the prefixture. Now I know it's a little crowded in there, and complicated, so let's make this easier to see with one of Bruno's animations.
Before we get started, I'd just like to say that at its core, this pistol is a revolver lockwork, paired with a rotating firing pin. Now, let's explain how that is accomplished. This is the latch assembly. It sports a pair of hooks, one on either side of the pistol. It's held in place by a strong flat spring set inside the frame. Pressing the left side lever raises its hooks from a pair of lugs set on either side of the barrel assembly. This allows the barrels to drop. The extractor projects, then snaps into place, allowing us to load 4 cartridges. When closing the action, the lugs act on the latches, raising them out of the way before they snap back into place. The lockwork is double action only. Pulling the trigger presses the strut into the hammer. As the strut slips past the notch in the hammer falls, discharging one of our rounds. This overarching flat spring returns the trigger on release. Its unusual shape was necessary to squeeze the action into such a small frame. And just in case you're curious, this is the strut spring, keeping it biased into the hammer, which is of course powered by the mainspring. The upper half presses the hammer stirrup, constantly biasing it towards the cartridges. The lower half presses mostly on the frame. However, this extension off the hammer is capable of also compressing the lower arm of the spring. When we fire the pistol, the hammer falls and its tail rises at the moment of discharge. The tail acts on the mainspring's lower arm, lifting it off the frame slightly. Once the inertia is lost, this spring tension returns the hammer to a rebounded state, with the firing pin retracted. Alright, that's the simple stuff. Let's get a look at the firing pin assembly, what Thorne called the hammer bolt. Riding in the tines of the hammer is the firing pin assembly spindle. This is what allows the hammer to guide it forwards and back. On its surface, 4 helical cam grooves and 4 straight tracks. The grooves interact with this overhanging stud, which in turn is powered by a flat spring. And of course, finally, at the other end of the assembly, is the firing pin, offset and a bit difficult to see just now. Keeping our eyes on the drum, we can see that pulling a trigger cocks the hammer back, drawing the drum rearward. As it travels, the overhanging stud forces it to rotate 1/4 turn, before the stud moves into one of the linear grooves. When the hammer falls, the drum does not rotate, and the firing pin hits the next primer, discharging the pistol. Let's see that trick again. It's actually quite simple. Before we open this action to extract, let's get a look at the pieces involved. This is the extractor itself, taking up 1/4 of each of the chamber's rear, and supporting a portion of each case rim. It's constantly held flush by this coil spring. When we open the action, the spring will be overcome by this lever, which will be kept from rotating, for a time, by this odd T-shaped clutch, which in turn is biased into the hinge point of the pistol by this flat spring. Got it? Let's watch. As we open the pistol, the extractor initially stays with the barrel assembly. However, a notch in the lever bottoms out on the clutch. This prevents the lever from rotating further, and thereby pries out the extractor, which in turn pulls out the spent cases. As the barrel assembly fully opens, its underside strikes the wings of the clutch, forcing it to rotate slightly away from the hinge point. This frees the lever to suddenly rotate, and the extractor springs back flush, ready to be reloaded. Alright, that's it for now. Let's go shoot it.
Now, as interesting as this thing is, it wasn't the end of Lancaster's pistol development. Instead, we get to investigate two significant variations with this one additional example, a double-barreled Lancaster. Look, two. This example sits at 11 1/4 inch long, but weighs only 2 pounds. That's likely because we have just 2 barrels. The chambering is still the same, marked for the .476 centerfire cartridge, a reference to the Enfield Mark III cartridge. The other unique feature of this pistol is its cocking trigger, based on the Tranter design. Now you might imagine that the 2-barrel system is simpler than the 4-barrel and that it would be the same general mechanism, but you'd be wrong. While there was a 2-barrel system covered in the original 1881 patent, it was never put to work in a pistol. Instead, what we find inside of this gun, despite being somewhat significant in departure from the 4-barrel, was never apparently patented, as Thorn felt its core function was covered enough in the original document for no one to really be able to copy it. Assuming we look at the face of the breech, the original firing pin traveled in a circle, 1/4 turn at a time, thereby setting off each of the 4 cartridges. Trying to get the 2-barrel to make a 180-degree rotation in one go was nearly impossible. You would either need an incredibly long pull of the trigger or a painfully acute cam track. Instead, Thorn opted to keep the 90-degree rotation by adding 2 firing pins and designing a cam track that would rotate one way and then back the other. While that alone is interesting enough, my pistol also includes another optional feature of the Lancaster, a cocking trigger, which is frankly so similar to Tranter's 1853 design, I'm unsure how this was patented. But surprisingly, it was, again by Thorn, in 1882, and like the previous, this seems to have been featured on a rifle in the illustration. To be fair, Lancaster was also producing multi-barreled rifles on these principles, though they are not our story today. They're also extremely elusive. Now, these are not the only changes we see from our 4-barrel to this guy, but let's look at the rest while we go more hands-on. Alright, this is our 2-barrel, distinct and different from our 4 in a couple of ways, but of course, let's start by admiring how friggin' beautiful this thing is. Look at these lines, there is no revolver that looks like this in that period. Now, what the heck is going on? Well, we covered the obvious, 2 barrels, and the fact that we have a cocking trigger. I'll get to those in a second, but I told you there'd be extras, right? Well, let's zoom in here. Just from the outside, we can see the extractor is fairly different. We do have an over travel point and arm. We'll see that in a moment as I open this guy up. Obviously, this arm comes up and operates on a pin. The pin is attached to a rod that goes down in here and is spring-loaded to push it back into the barrels. When we open the gun up, this guy travels until he snags on that lever, and once he snags on that lever, he starts yanking on that pin. See? Pulls her right on out until we get to our over travel point. This guy slips over that finger, and boom, she snaps back down, ready for loading. Once again, we open her up. We can see that it pulls our extractor plate. All the work is happening on the left side. However, there is a pin here, a locator pin, one that I need to scrub with some Ballistol, y'all. Look at that. And it's going to go ahead and let her up until it goes over center. And boom, we're back in business. We can also see that we have 2 barrels, or 2 chambers too. And at the back, we have 3 firing pin holes. This will be interesting in just a moment. Oh yeah, we are different inside. To some of you, it's not so obvious what the differences are, but don't worry, I'll walk you through them. Ignoring all the fancy stuff and looking at the core lock work, we've moved away from the auto-rebounding instant system that we saw in the Webley No. 4 in the 4-barrel Lancaster. Instead, we have a Fonyu system, which is used on a lot of revolvers after this point. We have a mainspring that's pushing forward on the hammer like you'd expect. The lower arm of the mainspring is pressing on this little armature here. This armature not only presses on an extension at the back of the hammer that we can't really see, but also buried down in there, it's wrapped around and pressing on the trigger. More on this in a moment, it'll be a lot easier to see in an animation. That system of being able to return the trigger and rebound the hammer is of course the Fonyu that we discovered here on our show and have seen time and time again. For anyone curious, this bit of marshmallow is a rubber pencil eraser that was shoved into the system to keep that stupid arm from bouncing out every time we fired the gun. Apparently, that is a wear part we were unaware of. This little solution was provided by my buddy Tom, who is the dumbest genius I have ever met in my life. Thank you, Tom. I've gone ahead and placed 2 dummies in here. Let's just see that difference for a second. I'm going to fire the gun. Boom. And then if you notice, this has not yet rebounded like the old system that automatically did it. The arm is raised. If I release, then it rebounds as the trigger is reset. Now, speaking of that trigger, you may have noticed how I worked this, which is that we're using an old black powder percussion cap style of Tranter trigger lock work, which is that as I pull this lower trigger, we'll see it begins indexing our hammer here with that arm. And as we get to the rear, it doesn't have enough room to clear. It can't drop the hammer. I can do this as much as I want, and the system remains suspended on that firing pin position, which is actually kind of critical. See, it doesn't keep rotating, and we can't go anywhere until I pull this, the final single action trigger. All of the weight of the mechanism is already taken up, so this is actually fairly light and pleasant by comparison to this massive double action pull. Light and pleasant. This is a lot better than what we saw in our double action that happened to be on a 4-barrel. Now, if we go ahead and have an emergency, let's say this cracked off entirely, we can still pull with the original trigger. It's just god-awful heavy. So the best thing you would do is, if you haven't broken it somehow, in an emergency, is to grab both triggers, pull all the way through until bang. So you have effectively a single action but finger cocked option or a double action all the way through option. Now, I'm sure some of you were watching the mechanism closely instead of paying attention to the trigger, but let's get a better look anyway. The indexing on the drum is actually very difficult to see in this position because it's set up to go only 2 ways. It's supposed to rotate just 90 degrees one way, and then it goes forward, boom, and then it rotates 90 degrees the other way and goes boom, forward. And it's very hard to see, but there are in fact 2 firing pins. That guy there, and that guy there. The second firing pin is constantly being diverted into an alternate channel. This is set here, right there, and of course it comes through here. That means that we're always alternating between 2 positions. This pin comes out here, that one goes into the dummy hole, or vice versa. That one comes out its hole, and then this one comes out the dummy hole. That allows for only 90 degrees of rotation every time you pull the trigger, limiting the amount of friction and the necessary length of the system. Now, just to be clear, while these are common configurations of their pistols, they are not exclusively set up this way. You can have a 2-barrel with a double action trigger or a cocking trigger on a 4-barrel. It's just that more likely than not, you're going to see it this way. The 2-barrel appears to have been favored as a target pistol, and that's why it got this configuration. This was favored more as a, oh boy, I'm going to dump all 4 in a bad guy in a bad situation. These guns also represent some differences in terms of the timeline of construction, because again, quick insta-rebounding hammer with extra springs. This one managed to combine Fanyu system and have a auto-retracting rebounding hammer. And for those of you who are familiar with the revolver series, that'll all be quite obvious, discounting the funkiness that is the multiple barrels. While absolutely unheard of in our show's history, this unique mechanism, to me, deserves its own animation. So everyone thank Bruno for doing the extra work today.
Our double-barreled pistol displays several changes from the 4-barrel. Some of these are inherent to the number of rounds, some are because of the double trigger, and some are due to the advancement of the design as a whole. Don't worry, we'll see it all. Like the 4-barrel, we'll press the latch to release the barrel assembly. Then load our cartridges and snap it home. Now curiously, the lockwork is very similar to before, essentially double action only in makeup, and yet we can initially eat up all the take-up. Here we have the lower trigger, to which is attached the strut, again powered by its own flat spring. Pulling the lower trigger presses the strut into the hammer, cocking it back, but not far enough to let the strut slip past. Using only the lower trigger, the lockwork cannot be fired. Releasing the trigger will also ease the system back into its rebounded state. So, in order to fire, we must pull both the lower trigger and the upper trigger, which further tips the strut, allowing it to clear the hammer. By the way, while we're still holding the trigger, take note of the introduction of a Fanyu rebound arm. Powered by the lower mainspring, this wraps around the hammer and puts pressure on the trigger via the pin for the strut. And of course, a shelf set in the same arm will rebound the hammer as we release our grip. Extraction is similar to the 4-barrel, with some necessary changes. The extractor itself is now designed for 2 chambers, and its pin and spring rest inside a tube on the left side of the barrel assembly. The lever arm can no longer fit down the center. Instead, it rides to the outside, with a square hole set around a guide pin. The lever, of course, bottoms out on a clutch, again now projecting to the left side as a simple flipper and powered by its own flat spring. When we open the action, the lever follows along until it bottoms out on the clutch, prying the extractor against its spring, ejecting the 2 spin cases. Once the frame opens enough, the barrel assembly rotates the clutch, which frees the lever and extractor to spring back flush for reloading. Once again, we have a firing pin assembly, which features camming grooves and an overhanging spring-loaded stud to drive the rotation. We also have a pair of firing pins, one aligned with a chamber, and the other aligned with a blind hole. This is just a recess which allows the unused pin a place to go. From the rebounded position, firing the pistol does not rotate the drum. The stud simply travels in the straight groove. So long as we never actually fire the pistol, the pin will not rotate. That's because only when fired does the drum travel forward enough to admit the pin into the next cam track, one of 2 diagonal cuts, each responsible for just 1/4 turn. First one way, and then after firing again, back the other. Just to be clear, this means the firing pins alternate positions. One discharging one chamber, then the other discharging the second. Brilliant. Let's go shoot it.
Now, these pistols were not actually constructed by Lancaster in London. Instead, they were shopped out to the trade, likely coming from Birmingham. Sadly, the actual workshop is still unknown. Each pistol has a serial number stamped on its various major parts. This is the assembly number and ranges from 0 to 100. It was used in the construction of the handgun and to reassemble it after finishing. The nearly complete pistols were delivered to Lancaster without rifling, as the oval bore was added in-house by them, along with their actual serial numbers. For normal triggers, this was engraved on the trigger guard. Pistols fitted with either double triggers or the occasional optional selection for a trigger guard spur were marked on the lower strap. The serial numbers in and of themselves can be just a bit confusing on these guns. They range from 7,100 to just shy of 9,300. You might think that over 2,000 of these pistols were produced, but Lancaster used one sequence for all of their firearms, so rook rifles, double guns, revolvers, and more are all mixed in with the little Howdahs. David E. Cooley, however, had a chance to review the ledger and counted up 946 serial numbers assigned to these multi-barreled pistols, making them fairly rare just on the face of it. This was likely due to their extreme price, £8 sterling, even in 1893. Recall, at its most expensive, the Webley No. 4 top break had been £4 3 shillings. It's also worth mentioning that there is a 121 continuous serial number streak labeled in the books as Benson & Company for Spain. These were 4-barreled pistols marked chambered .455. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, none from this group have surfaced again, so we're unsure why they were purchased in bulk. Loosely, the Lancaster pistols can be grouped into 6 major configurations. This is split in half by the number of barrels. The 4-barrel Papa model with a large frame, generally chambering .476 or .455. This can be found in either an early or later pattern. The 4-barrel Mama version with a small frame and large grip, generally chambering .380 long or .360 number 5. And of course a 4-barrel Baby with a small frame and small grip, better suited for a pocket, generally chambered in .380 short. Then we have the 2 barrels, the monstrous, large-framed Papa, usually in .577. This can be found with a frankly unusual-looking grip, or something more like what we have here. This chamber is the closest that we will come to the inspirational Howdahs, which were frankly much more powerful than even this big but slow-moving round. Now, more common is the 2-barrel Mama, smaller framed and generally found in .476, .455, or .380 long. And finally, the Baby, pocket-friendly version chambered in .380 short. Most of these were made for Ramsey & Company in 1896, which is actually really late. All of these configurations can turn up with strange combinations of extra features and chamberings though, thanks to the occasional onesie-twosie special orders, which is not entirely uncommon on such an expensive accessory. While I don't want to go into a complete breakdown today of how many of each type were built, I will say I did find something surprising while doing my reading. Thanks to appearances in media and just the sheer cool factor, the 4 barrels are considered much more desirable today. It's the gun everybody wants. However, that was apparently true 100 years ago, meaning that the 4 barrels are more common. All 4 barrels combined add up to 712 examples, whereas the 2 barrels or double barrels total just 234, making a double much harder to find than a quad. Now, most of these pistols, regardless of configuration, were blued with a fine, bright polish. However, nickel and even gold plating could be ordered, along with fancy grips like ivory. These features are fairly rare. So, how were these guys received in the service? Well, their supporters were extremely loyal, and apparently the pistols made a striking impression, because I have never seen so many clear references to an exact model of handgun that someone had on a campaign. Look at this depiction of Sultan Muley Hassan receiving a gift of a pair of 4 barrels from the British government. There's no question what they are. Most English accounts of this gun come from various battles in the Mahdist War spread across Egypt and Sudan. Lord Beresford recalled, "I gave my horse to an Arab lad to hold. A few minutes afterwards, there was the crack of a pistol. I ran out, and there was the boy, lying on the ground. He had been fingering the 4-barrel Lancaster pistol in the holster, and that was the end of him, poor lad." Okay, not a great start, child emptying into himself, but note how he actually told us the make of the pistol. That is so rare in these stories. Sir George Scott Robertson also made direct reference to his carrying of a Lancaster pistol during his service. There's also a frankly unflattering account of a 4-barreled Lancaster being wielded by a Mr. Bennett Standard after the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, wherein he manages to fire upon and apparently either miss or fail to mortally wound a single stray opponent that was attempting a last-ditch attack. Lord Binning, who didn't have a Lancaster, even noted when someone else did, recalling the 1885 Khartoum expedition and a moment when the square was broken by the enemy. He and several others actually recalled, "For a moment through the smoke I caught a glimpse of Burnaby, his arm outstretched, his 4-barreled Lancaster pistol in his hand." Unfortunately, that poor man didn't survive much longer than that, as he had more attackers than he did cartridges. My favorite account, however, didn't come from combat. It was a letter from one Lieutenant Whitla in the Queen's Bays. On reaching my station in India, a bag belonging to me, containing amongst other things a Lancaster pistol, was stolen from my baggage. 3 weeks afterwards, when a heavy shower of rain washed away part of a mud wall, the men who were told to replace it found my pistol buried there. He goes on to describe that the pistol, buried without a covering in the wet mud for weeks, had rusted all up into the barrels too, but that the lockwork was untouched. After cleaning it, He fired several rounds without issue, though the stock was slightly eaten by white ants. This account was actually included in an 1886 report on revolvers and their use presented by then Major H.E.C. Kitchener, son of, yes, that Kitchener. Now, HEC was attempting to ask and answer the question of just what the heck the British Army should be doing about these revolver contraptions. Ultimately, the real problem that they faced was a lackluster rollout of new technology. Poor training had resulted in negligence, accidents, and poor performance. This would have been true of the multi-barreled pistols as much as for the wheel guns. Still, there were some advantages to a Lancaster over an early double-action revolver. You might recognize them as the mirrors to those problems which we listed with the revolver earlier. No jamming, a sealed action. They were fairly plain-sighted, which means there was low risk of snag. You could use larger calibers, and you kept more power in a sealed breech. This also meant that there was no side blast, so you could brace it how you like. Specific to the Lancasters, the oval bore rifling was also very easy to keep clean compared to a revolver, and specific to the Enfield service revolver, which loaded slowly through a gate and then unloaded mostly quickly by snapping it open, the Lancaster was actually faster overall on the reload. This did not, however, extend to other designs like the Webley No. 4, an adaptation of the Belgian Koné. The major problems with the Lancasters were fairly obvious. They have a limited capacity of only up to 4 shots. In reviews of the time, the 2-shot 5.77 version was felt to be too hard recoiling for the limited gains in power. The double-action pistols, like this one, were felt to be a little too heavy on the trigger. Though, given the lack of a manual safety, a lighter trigger would not have been exactly great either. Frankly, we all know that the revolver was going to win this fight, at least for a couple of decades. The world would have to wait for the development of the automatic pistol to finally overcome the wheel gun's limits. Even given the smaller market of the modernized Howdah, the Lancaster was not without its competitors, by the way. Its biggest 2 opponents were Martin of London's mitrailleuse pistol and Thomas Bland's monostriker, neither of which did nearly as well, which is really saying something. Ultimately, the strengths of the revolvers, the introduction of smokeless powder and pistols, and especially the emergence of autoloaders, spelled the demise of these little Howdahs. It's no wonder almost all of them were made in the 1880s, with very few into the 1890s. Sales might have trickled on a little bit beyond that, but this was never what you call a solid market. Still, Thorne remained at the Lancaster helm, keeping the good name going until his death from influenza in 1914. From there, well, the company carried on without, but that's beyond our scope today. Instead, let's enjoy ourselves by turning to Mae and get her opinion on 2 distinct and unusual mechanical pistols. Once more, we've made room for Mae.
Hello.
And we have a pair of not Howdahs. These are very popularly called Howdahs. I want to be fair. Howdah is supposed to be pretty much a rifle cartridge coming out of a handgun.
Right.
These
it's
are
not a, yeah, these are
handgun
pistol cartridge.
They made a 5.77 version. Mm-hmm. Not really rifle 5.77. I know everybody
it's
thinks
more stout.
It's a bigger diameter. It's big diameter bullet.
Right.
It's still very slow moving. I wouldn't necessarily even call it a Magnum round. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a lot of recoil according to the paperwork. I haven't shot one, but still not a Howdah. A Howdah is a lot of hurt.
Fair.
So, despite the popularization of that term for these and the fact that they evolved from Howdahs, not really Howdahs. So, these are multi-barreled pistols with rotating firing pins. And actually, it's fair to call them pistols, just multi-shot pistols.
Sure.
We're kind of spoiled by the modern semi-automatic, so we just think of semi-automatics when we think of pistols, but pistol.
Sure.
The lockwork, pretty much revolver.
Yeah, because it's got like a revolving firing pin in there. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, you basically take a revolver lockwork, stick a mechanism on to rotate the firing pin, you're done. Which is not unlike a Sharps pepper box. So, fine. Now, you've got the 4-barrel. That was the one that was by far and away the most commonly made.
And we've got this preloaded with the dummies that we had before.
Yes, we went ahead and left the rubber cap dummies in there so that you can manipulate it without tearing it up.
Hooray.
Because there's really not a lot of moving parts on the outside to show off. And being a double action only, there's no way to really ease the hammer without taking it apart.
No safety.
Right. It's actually remarkable how little's going on. You have 4 barrels and a lever to crack it open and a trigger.
I like how clean it looks, though. It's very just straightforward in terms of just of its appearance.
Quite gentlemanly.
Yeah, it's very professional looking.
So it's in your hand. Give me your first impressions.
First impression, honestly, is just how dang muzzle heavy this thing is. It feels ridiculously muzzle heavy, like it wants to slip out of my hand almost. It's uncomfortable.
And then
you combine it with the grip.
Yeah.
And it's not great.
Okay.
Because it's this weird bird's head grip that swoops out in such a way that either I feel like I'm supposed to grip down and put the beveled side of it right in my palm swell. Well, that feels a little bit awkward, like I'm kind of far away from the trigger. Okay. Well, there's a little kind of dip in here where it feels like, well, maybe that's where my hand is supposed to go because it's almost like creating a knuckle up here up top. Maybe. Well, then I'm at a weird angle to then pull the trigger.
Yes.
I can't really feel like where I'm supposed to be. Does it? Maybe it's the size of my hand because my hand is arguably maybe too small.
Let me try it out. No, that's weird.
That looks weird.
And then when I get an actual natural point, I have to drop in. And essentially what has happened to my hand is that I am holding an inverted single-action Army Colt.
I can see that.
Because I have a very aggressive front taper bird's head grip, which if you think of a bell grip on a Colt, or even like a Beasley grip on a Colt, they can be sort of aggressive on this front edge.
Yeah, they usually will be.
And you get a lot of pinky control. That's great. I've got a swell in the back that's going to the palm of my hand, like a saw handle. That works fine. It doesn't have the rear bell, though, because it swoops under.
Right.
So I don't have any support at the bottom of my palm.
Which feels weird.
It's not so bad if you have a gun in which you're manipulating a hammer, but I'm not. This is a double action only.
No.
And then the knuckle is not a knuckle. It's clearly that this is the top of the gun, and then it comes off back to the action. It has a slight lead in, a slight dip, so that you can get on it some, but you can't get your webbing in there.
No.
And so I'm going to tell you, without even firing it, there's not going to be any recoil support like a true saw handle grip like we saw with the Colt 1878.
It's going to be weird.
Yeah. All right.
So those are my first two immediate sensations with it. Then obviously if I'm looking at it, I have this massive lever sticking out.
Yeah, can you figure out how to load it without instructions?
Oh, Lord. It's the only thing you can literally do other than pull the trigger on this thing, of course. Yeah, which that's great. It's kind of dummy-proof in that, right?
Right. That poor boy had two choices to make, and he made the wrong one.
Oh, Lord, he did.
Anyway,
I forgot about that.
So, if you would, here, why don't you break it open sideways with those cartridges?
All right.
They're fake cartridges.
Just pop
Tip them out. There we go.
And you can go slow if you have gravity helping, but if you don't, you may get a little stuck.
Honestly, even on range empty cases.
It was dragging a little bit. Well, to be fair, that might have been an addition of the dirt maybe on the side, like because of the powder, maybe foul. Like, okay, I'm trying to stretch out.
It's supposed to work. No, I suspect that there's kind of soggy ejector. I think you're supposed to crack them open sideways or upside down and just get them out of there. But, or maybe there's something I'm missing about they used to be snappier before they got 100 and some odd years old. But,
no, maybe, but this one's in nice condition.
I mean, these things were 100 years old in the 1990s or 80s, 1980s. Anyway, so you pop her open.
Yep.
Your extractor comes out.
Yep. And that this feels very revolver-esque
in
a lot of ways. And then it pops back in when I go over top.
Did you want to load any of these?
Sure. Doesn't one of these need to be
This one has to go on the bottom right. Or
how do you know that?
It has a slightly thicker rim because it was made from a Schofield case.
Oh.
And for some reason it likes being there but nowhere else.
So I noticed, by the way, when I'm going to load it, I guess I should open it and then reach with my left hand to put in my cartridges so that I'm holding the grip the whole time. Yeah. I don't know why it feels kind of more natural to do this. Maybe because there's more weight here.
Yeah,
so I naturally want to go for the weighted side for holding. It's going to get hot after a while, but whatever. Okay, so this one made a great sound going in. I talked over it, but I promise it's a good sound.
And then you can snap it shut, but you're being sweet to it.
Yeah, I am. I do want to be sweet to it.
Okay.
It's so pretty. And then from there, it's just ready to go. It's double action. So there's no pre-cocking to be done. It's definitely sealed, and I just line up my sights, pull trigger, ready to go.
This is the Macintosh of pistols. You have open lever, you throw cartridges in, you pull trigger.
It is the Macintosh of it.
You want the cartridges out, you open it. It throws them out.
It's straightforward. It does two things.
Yeah,
you pull trigger or you open up.
Loading, aiming, pulling trigger. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no manual. This
is supposed to make it super straightforward for people, I guess.
In that regard, it is very...
Were they worried about people not getting it? Guns? And they went, oh crap, people have been screwing around too much. I guess we better give them something simpler.
You're making a fuss, but to be honest with you, in combat, fewer things to go wrong.
You're not wrong.
Removing the human element as much as possible.
I guess the only thing you think of is maybe if they accidentally wang this and open it up unintentionally,
Yeah,
but then
you gotta really try. It's really out of the way of the natural grip path.
I can't say it. Well, no, it's pretty easy to pop, but you're not wrong.
Yeah. So from there, maybe we should talk about the trigger. You do have dummies in there with rubber backs.
Right.
So do you want to...
Dude, line up on sights or anything. We're going to talk about that in a second.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the trigger itself, you're not wrong. It's incredibly, I don't remember if you talked about this in the episode. I want to say you did, but it's an incredibly heavy trigger.
Go ahead and take your normal position because your finger's pretty far back.
Okay.
I want to talk about this. We normally don't go dry firing. We can ease the hammers.
But with this one, we've got the dummies in
it's all
here
shielded
with the rubber
out,
back, so it's actually pretty solid.
Let's just go ahead and pull.
So I'm doing it slightly cleaner now that I know what to expect with it. However, I will say on range, I distinctly remember thinking, gosh, this is unusually heavy, and it kind of felt a little creakier. Have we cleaned this up a little bit?
No, you know what it is? You're just sitting in the studio. There's a big difference between being in a studio, just pulling a trigger evenly, and being on a range and pointing and trying to hold your line of sight and make sure that you're squeezing through and you don't know when it's coming and you don't know how much stack there is.
Right.
So what does it actually feel like, though? Describe it to them.
It just feels pretty heavy but consistent.
Very even?
It does feel very even, yeah, what do you mean by consistent? It doesn't feel clean per se. I want to say it kind of feels a little bit like I'm pulling through soft sand, which isn't bad. Like, it doesn't feel horrible, but it's not the cleanest I've felt.
Right. Would you win a target competition with this?
No.
Okay.
I'm just gonna no. Well, that's also to do with the sights, by the way. So, like, the sights themselves are unfortunately very wide. The V-notch in the back is it has to be the widest set V-notch I have ever seen. Yeah.
It really reminds me of the Webley self-loader, having that big wide back.
Yeah. But then it's actually fairly narrow when you look down it. But this one, the notch itself was very narrow, but this one, it's wide open, which is really strange to me because it comes to such a fine point. So you think, oh no, this was intentional.
How do you feel about the front sight? It's a half moon that has a sort of...
It's got to be the longest half moon I've ever seen.
I'm not sure if it's a brass wash or brass, but it's sort of an amber...
This looks like someone took something bigger than a quarter and just stuck it on there.
It's a huge front sight.
Right? It's massive. But unfortunately, it's also very thick at the base and thin at the top, which is good for lining up the top with it. But for some reason, this whole combination is very difficult to kind of settle appropriately.
Opposing Vs, this barley, corn, and open V thing, right?
Yeah.
It was a British thing for a long time, and eventually everybody got sick of it because trying to have opposing Vs means it gets very difficult with those round tops and then the narrow center of the front sight to pick up the vertical. Yes,
it really kind of can be. So unfortunately, it takes you a moment to just kind of line up with it. Okay. I really tried to take my time with lining up my shots on this one. They still kind of weren't perfect.
So heavy but consistent trigger.
Yes.
Difficult sights, but you can find them. What happens when we actually get it to go bang?
The recoil on this guy, it was very linear. So I can say that. However, there was a lot more to it.
Didn't it feel flippy?
Well, I mean, there was some flip to, don't get me wrong, but it felt like most of it came back into my hand. Like, I remember distinctly feeling as if the top... Huh?
Right in the palm?
Well, yeah, basically the top of my palm, essentially closer to my thumb, and then down my arm, the top of it. It really felt the whole impact through the arm.
That sounds wonderful.
You say that until there's a lot of it.
Okay.
But for some reason, it just didn't feel very controllable in this one. It didn't feel as comfortable as I expected to. I love the idea of linear control with it. That's ideal in handguns. But for this one, it just felt awful.
Well, looking at the footage from your experience, I would say it was placing the recoil in the right spot. However, it was giving you no support to hold that spot.
We come back to the grip.
Yes. It looked like you kept fighting the grip.
My hand would slide on it no matter what I would try. It would want to go up to this nice little deep set, or not deep set, this wide set little crevice here, the valley, and there's no real perfect spot for my hand to settle on this guy.
And once you're in the valley, you're cocked up in the air.
Right, which doesn't make sense.
And if you drive it down, you're pulling awkward, like you're trying to pull your index finger up and over your knuckle. It doesn't work well.
Right. So no matter what, I really felt like I was doing some weird dance with this guy, just trying to get myself sorted out with it.
I really like to try one of the older ones with the really wacky grip.
Oh, I've seen pictures of that.
We haven't seen that one. We do have we have the more saw-handly grip here. We'll talk about it in a moment, but I'd like to see that. So overall, on the 4-shot, how confident are you of defending yourself? Let's say defending yourself one-on-one.
What does the other guy have?
I mean, he's coming at you with a knife or something.
Oh, okay. Well, if it's a knife versus a gun, I probably would be fine.
Well, yeah, you say that, but you've got a Remington single-shot pistol, and a guy's coming at you all of a sudden very violently with a knife, and you have to cock it and fire exactly one shot before you're out of ammo.
Right.
How confident are you?
Yeah, okay. Fair point. But with this one, at least it's double action only. And granted, someone's coming at me in this scenario. I think I can pull off the trigger, and I've got at least 4 shots. So hopefully...
You're feeling good you get the one guy.
At least one.
Okay.
But the problem is that when you're adding multiple people into that scenario,
this is the problem.
It starts to get a little tricky.
Most of these guns that went into service, that actually saw field service in Egypt and the Sudan. And those were very chaotic battles.
Right.
You're probably going to have to fight more than 4 guys, even as an officer.
This really truly feels like it should be kind of my last option. This is when you think of in the pistols, so you're like, oh crap, I've dropped my gun or my rifle somewhere, shoot, and just pull this thing out.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to, but hopefully I've got it on me as my last option.
Now, just to be clear, the gun that one was up against, let's set this guy aside for a second because he's a little special.
But by the way, I did want to mention real quick, this one does look really cool.
Oh, it looks amazing.
It looks awesome.
It looks awesome. Looking awesome doesn't always mean being awesome.
Right.
It looks awesome. This.
Yes.
This is the Enfield Mark I. This is the handgun that the Army finally introduced after being way behind on the revolver question. They tried to make a technologically advanced revolver. We have a whole episode on how smart and stupid this gun is.
Yes, we do. Go watch that.
Mae didn't care for it very much.
No, it's not very user-friendly in a lot of ways, especially users with smaller hands.
Right. Now, we already covered all the problems with this particular gun in terms of being a revolver.
Sure.
In this episode. The gas leak and blah, 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 right? However, specific to this gun is the fact that you have to gate load one at a time.
Yep.
And then, if you want to, fire your rounds, and when you want to unload, you pop this guy open.
System. Yeah.
And you have to roll a little bit. Because that bottom one will get snagged.
Almost dang near every time.
Right. So
it's weird if it doesn't get snagged.
So to unload again, 6 rounds empty, pop, and then roll. And as you can tell, it's already sticking on the sprag a little bit, or on the hand. And then I'm fighting a bit. Then I put it back together.
Yep.
Then open the gate. Then load 6 rounds. That's the reload cycle for this.
Really slow.
This gets 6 rounds, though. Right from the start.
Yep.
This has 4 rounds. And the reload cycle for this is just pop, kick them out, and then throw in your 4.
Do you remember that they were...
Yeah, just making sure one didn't snag onto the extractor because they're kind of soggy. Yeah. So it's just pop, they're out, load your 4, and go.
Yeah.
This loads faster than that.
Yeah.
Like and I could see sitting on a range somewhere at home, not in war, going, well, this is faster.
Yeah. Now, here's my thing. Were they anticipating multiple reloads? Was that something that they were really heavily focused on? Because some people, that's not a thing.
Right. You game it out before you go, and then you get there and you realize how fast it's all happening.
Right.
And the officers were told, you're really not supposed to be fighting with your pistol anyway. It's a last-ditch thing for 1 or 2 man charge on you. Your men are supposed to... And then you get in a fight. And then all hell... So... I could see gaming this into being a better product.
Sure.
Right? But just for a moment, take this.
Okay.
Is this 4-barrel any lighter than that?
No, this feels heavier.
Yeah, the 4-barrel's heavier.
Yeah.
Is the grip better?
No.
This isn't your favorite gun.
I don't like this grip that much at all. It's not better.
Right. Now,
the Lancaster's not better.
This had significantly more recoil in the sense of flip. Right? Was it so much so that you would prefer that inherently over this just because of that recoil advantage?
It comes back to the grip is the problem because this makes it more controllable.
Right. And it's the same cartridge. It's the quote-unquote, this is Mark 476 centerfire. That is the commercial designation for what was the Enfield Mark III cartridge technically for the Mark II version of this gun.
Right.
That is the same cartridge.
Yeah.
The only distinct advantage you're getting is the sealed action.
It is very sealed. You're not wrong.
You're not.
And the simplicity.
Well, of use.
Yes.
Internally, it's still as complicated.
Oh.
Now, I will say, one thing I didn't mention this episode is that because you don't have to rotate the cylinder, the chambers stay the same. These guns, when they start to foul, as you shoot them and the cases get driven back, they start to bind at the rear and slow it down. So it does become
a little more difficult for operation.
And it can ruin your trigger pull or change your trigger pull.
It can.
That won't happen on the other gun.
Correct.
The other gun will not foul in such a way as to change the pull of the trigger. So
its action is well protected from all that potential fouling that can occur.
So now that we covered all that,
cool.
Which of these do you choose?
Unfortunately, I'm probably going to end up picking the Enfield personally. Overall, performance-wise, I just feel more confident with that one. However, I don't think I'd fault anybody for wanting to go for the Lancaster, just because I could see how they would think that might be a better option. I could understand it almost.
That is fair, which is exactly why the Lancaster was able to exist.
Thank you, yes.
Because this gun is so poor that makes sense.
That's really bad.
It's still not better, but it makes sense.
It's really bad. Although, personally, as a collector, I'm like, I want the Lancaster. That thing looks rad.
I mean, yeah. Now, here's the problem I have with this whole scenario.
Okay.
We've covered
got a bunch of guns over there.
We always do. We've covered this gun before, the Tranter 1879.
I remember. That's honestly when I saw the levers, I went, hey.
This gun existed before the Enfield.
Okay.
It uses the same side latch, like you just referenced.
Sure.
Instant extraction. Also, well, technically this was
load
designed...
and unload the same way, which is nice.
This was designed for the Enfield Mark 1/2 cartridge, almost in secret, because technically it's in 450 Adams, but it can handle the whole thing. We have a whole episode.
Right.
Theoretically, same cartridge is capable in this gun. Would you pick this over both of those?
I can't see why not. I mean, inherently, it's a very solid action. It's got a very solid lock on it. Performance-wise, it did well.
It has all these lovely features that neither of these guns have, like the ability to interrupt the extraction. It has a wonderful side latch that's easy to use. The grip is terrific. Honestly,
I have a choice of single and double action. That is easier to manipulate hammer than the dang Enfield was.
Here's the thing.
Grip is ergonomically
The only
better.
downside of this pistol is that we just don't have as much data of how it was used, because it was a very limited run thing at the very end of the Tranter factory, and it failed to get as much military attention because of the introduction of the Enfield. So this is a gun that never got to spread its wings. It did, however, deeply influence what would come next. And so, I'm with you. It's a little untested, but by instinct, I choose the Tranter over both of these.
Yeah, naturally, it's a little bit better.
And then, if we look at... Oh, yeah, I got to keep pulling...
Are you losing all of them?
Biddles out. No, I just forgot what I had. This. Now, this is important.
We have not shot that one yet.
What? This is the number 4.
Oh, wait, yes, we have. I'm sorry. My brain.
Yeah. Tranter 1879. Enfield 1880. Then that guy starts appearing, not in his form as we have him here, but the early version of that guy starts appearing in like 82, 83 is when people are really getting a hold of them.
Sure.
And right about that same time, unbeknownst to Lancaster, this starts appearing in the market. Like this, not necessarily from Webley. It would have been the Belgian imports, the Connays. But Webley then takes it on, and this one's the updated version from the later 80s. But by the later 1880s, you're getting this. Not even later, the midpoint. Yeah, that's the quote. People like to call it the price. It's technically the Webley number 4. It's built on the Connay.
Okay.
We have a whole episode on this gun.
We do.
How do you feel about that?
I mean, I really love shooting this thing. Its grip actually feels pretty great. It's a solid, actually, in terms of handling. Everything felt pretty smooth. The
trigger's your favorite baby ever.
Oh my God, that was amazing. That was unexpected considering that whole day we had so many things go wrong with so many other guns. And then we pulled out this guy and I went, oh, well, this nickel gun is going to obviously be, Peepaw used WD-40 on that one.
Yeah.
No, Peepaw did not. Peepaw did fine.
This was
Ballistol.
To be honest with you, the number 4, the Connay style revolvers were exceptionally good. They had some wear issues that ended up seeing them replaced with something a little more sturdy. But in concept, excellent.
Yeah.
And you're talking about half the cost of that 4-barrel. Between the 4-barrel and this, what are you choosing?
Well, obviously this guy.
And what would you think of somebody that chose the other?
Well, okay, now we're getting in some weird territories where I'm like, well, you probably
You're too
should.
kind. I would think they're a fool. I mean, I would legitimately think it was foolish.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, that's what I was saying. I was like, yeah, no, you probably should know better to pick this guy.
You'd have to be obsessing about specifically the sealed action.
The sealed action, yeah.
That would have to be your obsession in order to pick between this and the 4-barrel. And then this...
don't get me wrong, the action is still more protected than that guy is.
This, to me, is when that gun lost. I mean, just lost. And even this was just a Belgian design that wandered into England and everybody was making it. Mm-hmm. When Webley really got rolling in 1886 was what became the WG model, which was what became what we all think of as a Webley.
Right.
It really smoked these all. And so from then on, I think you really only saw bespoke sales to people that wanted something very fancy.
Yeah, poor Lancaster just being knocked out of the park now.
It's really interesting, but that doesn't mean it's good. And being really valuable doesn't mean it's good. But this is all the military side of it. So let me set these guys out of our way for a moment.
Okay.
Because the 2-barrel's kind of weird. The 2-barrel could be a military pistol. And in 5.77, that was really the highlight, is a 5.77 2-barrel.
Sure.
But in a 4.76 2-barrel like this with this cocking trigger, we're really considering it more of a target pistol at this point.
Yeah, that seems less military, more sighting.
These were much less often purchased. And if you had to use it militarily, you're only going to get off 2 shots. I don't think we need to be as critical of this on that assessment because just being a 2-shotter, it's already like, why would
There's no way.
So let me give you that.
Okay. Because we are now Nagant 1877 territory with that.
Well, actually, that's actually a really good comparison.
Yeah.
We covered the Nagant 1877 2-barrel pistol, which is a side-by-side 2-barrel. This is an over-under. And actually, now that you've made that case, that might be a much better version of a 2-barrel pistol now that I think about it.
It kind of is.
But go ahead and give me your initial impressions on this guy.
Well, it's a lot like our 4-shotter in that I have a single lever in which I extract or open her up to extract and also load. Okay, cool. Very straightforward with that. However, unlike the 4-shot, there's a lot more going on externally on this one. Maybe not on this side, but on the opposite side, you can see there's like a whole lever section here that's obviously not visible on the 4-shot.
It's not as clean looking.
No, it definitely is not.
It's much more steampunky.
It is more steampunky, but also more vulnerable in some ways because of that. Because it's got parts of the action exposed as a result, technically.
That's fair. I don't know if one's
even
ever
with
broken,
the double trigger, it's got this whole spur down here, which is honestly it feels flimsy. I'm surprised this one's actually not been snapped off before.
And it's got a skeletonized trigger guard.
Yeah,
so
I'm seeing that.
That's weakening the corners of the trigger guard.
And it's already got a huge little chunk out down here. It's got already where dings and dangs have happened there, so it's definitely susceptible to damage.
Mm-hmm. So what about that cocking trigger?
Oh, what about the cocking trigger?
Yeah, you're already playing with it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to feel it. Oh, yeah. Well, I remember distinctly thinking, okay, so as you're pulling it,
let's get you going. You ready?
Oh, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we'll use the dummies because then you can talk about it.
Yeah, okay. Here you go.
There's your dummies.
Thank you.
So we can not tear that up too bad.
Okay.
And then, I kind of skipped ahead. How's that grip? Like, get settled in there.
Oh, it's the same one. Not the same one, but it's another bird's head grip that essentially has me really far away, but luckily...
This has a very aggressive knuckle.
It has a very aggressive knuckle. So
but when you creep into it...
When I creep into it, that's where it wants me to be is the thing. And it feels the best when you creep into it.
Yeah, but point with that.
I have to point down.
Painful.
It's weird. It's weird, but it feels better when you creep up on it. I've noticed that.
Yeah.
Because it transfers the recoil way more linearly. It feels better.
Well, it directly hits that webbing. Yeah.
So you don't feel it as bad as the Howdah.
Well, no, you're not.
As bad as the 4-shot.
You're not. Well, not only that, but you're not sliding.
Right. Which makes a huge difference.
You can hold the same grip.
It's kind of nice.
So, all right, you're there.
Yep.
You're cocking.
So when you're cocking, it's a little bit difficult to hold the gun steadily because I'm having to pull such a long distance and it's not light.
You're also very off axis.
Yes, you are.
Now that, by the way, is a much earlier concept. I have one here.
I actually haven't done that episode on that one yet.
No, I don't have any bullets.
Okay.
If anybody has a proper Tranter bullet mold, let me know.
Okay.
Because I need bullets for this percussion gun. I actually would love to cover these early Tranter percussion guns.
That would be fascinating.
There are no reproductions for these. This is an original that somebody monkeyed with, and it's been put into working order, so it's worth shooting. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't have the correct bore for this, which is unfortunate, because these are not an American 44. They're its own thing. But if anybody has that, yeah. But this is a concept that goes way back, which is that you could cock the trigger, and then I'll hold this hammer and pull that nice light single action pull, and boom. So I get all the advantages of a single action without having to awkwardly thumb my hammer. And I have the advantages of a double action because I can just pull both triggers until it goes boom.
Right.
Same concept on that gun there.
Yeah, which I technically did do both of that. I just did the double action trigger pull kind of slow. Like I basically pulled it as I was pulling in with the trigger with the spur down there. I pulled it slowly just so I had a good even pull with it. Right.
And you also had to have a little momentum because like I said earlier in the episode that little breast on the hammer doesn't quite clear anymore after 140 years. So you have to give it a little snatch to get it to go over center. Originally, it would have been very smooth and crisp.
But otherwise, it feels pretty clean by comparison. Like, it's not bad.
Which trigger system do you prefer?
So, no, I would prefer the double.
Really? Even though it's much heavier?
So, just in general, if I'm thinking in terms of actual use, in terms of protection, yeah, I definitely would prefer the double. Hands down, there's no way around that. But the problem is that this one, compared with the grip, naturally just feels easier to use.
Yes, but that's the grip. What about the trigger?
Yeah, I know.
No, okay. I actually like the cocking trigger. I don't find it confusing.
I like it. It just doesn't mean that it's, the best thing to use.
I think it's great. I would use this in combat because for me, I can just pull both. Boom. Or if I have a moment, be like, oh, there's that guy. I can actually get up there and
take your time. And
if I want to make a skill shot with that, no hope. No, I understand the skill shot's really unlikely. But I would take a 4-barrel with the cocking trigger before I would take a 4-barrel with the double action.
When was the last time somebody was skill shotted out of the world with that?
You make fun, but there have been a fair number of defensive shootings in excess of 50 yards, even in recent memory. And trying to make a 50-yard shot with that heavy double versus this, sometimes you need a little more precision. Or I guess accuracy in this case.
Accuracy, yes.
But I don't dislike cocking triggers. I don't think they're a terrible idea.
I just don't think that conceptually they work well for the intended purpose, usually with firearm, which is for defense or attack of any nature.
I think they're hard. The big problem is the snag risk. The weakness of this being in the wind.
That does seem it's also very thin, which makes me nervous because I feel like if you were going to have something that well extended, maybe protect it somehow by making it thicker.
Hey, this thing's 140 years old. And it's still there.
I'm amazed it's still there.
Of course, it's survivor bias. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be here in the show. Somebody would have thrown it away.
Or, how many of them do you see intact in the market?
All of them.
All of them?
Well, so what happens with a lot of this stuff is if it broke in, say, the 19-teens, somebody threw it away. So...
Whatever is left is just left.
And once 19-teens went by, nobody was taking it into battle, so it didn't break anymore. So there's survivorship bias there. But still, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I like it. I think it's very cool.
It's definitely different. I can't argue with that.
Now, in a modern pistol, everything's, especially with semi-automatics, you don't need a cocking trigger to take that up. You're not fighting all this hammer tension. So there's no need for one. I'm not saying I want a cocking trigger on a modern pistol. But if I have to have a revolving mechanism with a heavy hammer and hammer spring, if this is the way it has to be built, then I actually don't mind the cocking trigger. I actually think it's a fairly smart solution for the problem of the revolver trigger. So, you already kind of got ahead of yourself with the recoil.
Yep.
Was there any difference in the sighting?
Unfortunately...
Not enough?
No, it's still that wide set V-notch with to be fair, the front sight's not quite as tall. And it doesn't quite have as much... There's still, unfortunately, a wide base going to a thinner top. But I guess there's not as much to work with, so at least I'm not kind of doing this dance of, whoa,
you're not doubting yourself?
Yeah, I'm a little more certain with it.
Okay.
Even though it's still not great.
It's deliberate. Otherwise
fun. Still definitely fun. I can't not say I didn't have fun handling both of the Lancasters. They're both different.
I assume you're going to tell me that the 2-barrel really ranks below everything else on the table.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's 2.
You wouldn't even take it over an infield?
No.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, I could at least load the infield once and I would get, 2 extra reloads out of this guy versus none out of that one, so...
So we had a standing offer on the 2-barrel, and I was waiting for 4-barrel because you can't do this episode without the 4-barrel.
Right.
Everybody wants to hear about the 4-barrel.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to tell you, after doing the research, I greatly prefer the 2-barrel because I'm not taking either into combat.
Right.
And
We're just having
just
fun. That's more fun to shoot. I can't argue with that.
Not just more fun to shoot, it's just fascinating. Like, just with the cocking trigger and everything, I love this little gun.
They're neat.
But I suppose we're at that point where we need to give thanks to the people who supported this episode.
Yes.
Because this one is helped along by our friend Tom, who made loan of the big 4-barrel.
Tombus.
Yes. And actually, he's the one that hooked us up with the 2-barrel in the long run, too.
Yeah.
But we also have executive producers. And on this one, I really want to thank Andy Wade because I know that he likes British guns.
Ooh.
So I'm hoping that we put him over the moon with 2 animations and with getting to something that he really loves. So thank you for all that support.
I do love that we went to the extent to get 2 animations for this since they are both different actions. That was cool. So thank you, Bruno, for taking care of that too.
These are so fascinating. I couldn't resist. We actually built it because of the 1911 episodes. They gave us enough room to put Bruno on these a long time ago, actually months before you're seeing this.
Right.
In order for him to get through all this wacky animation. And everyone make sure to give thanks to Bruno because this is 2 revolver mechanisms, which means lots of rotating parts, which he hates because it's hard to interface those. And then a drum on top of it. So this is like the worst thing Bruno's probably ever worked on. So we all need to apologize to him collectively because I probably don't pay him enough for that.
I'm going to have like a different screen for Bruno. Apologies too.
Yeah, and we're doing like before Christmas. He's trying to go out of town. You know what I mean? So anyway,
love you.
Bruno, this one's for you, buddy. I love you to death. Other than that, thank you, patrons. Thank you for everybody supporting the show. Do you have any final thoughts on these guys?
I honestly never thought we were going to have the chance to shoot them because it just seemed like it was going to be such a far-fetched thing out there. And I'd seen them in video games. You know, I played Battlefield. I'm not great, but I love first-person shooters. So seeing this in the games, and I went, oh, that's really cool. I would love to be able to shoot that, test that out one day to see how it feels because it looks wacky and weird, and it's so different from pistols, normal semi-automatic pistols and revolvers. And I thought, oh, that's so cool.
Right.
And I finally got to.
Yeah, and now how do you feel about it?
I still enjoy shooting it. It's still weird. You know what? As awful as I pitched how it was for shooting, it's so different that it's worth the uniqueness. I have to say that.
We have become such a heartbreaker club. Everybody was thinking that we were going to somehow dog on the 1911. And the only dog we could find is that it's really needlessly complicated to take apart.
Yeah.
And I still get people commenting on like, no, it's not. It's only like 8 parts. 8 parts. Like, you could have. It's like I had a guy. Why would you even have a captive recoil spring? I'm like, well, they put out one guy's eye. We literally said it in the episode, so that would be why.
Well, that guy deserved it.
But
he was monkeying around.
Unfortunately, these were a bad decision. Like paying double the money for half the gun is really, really a bad decision, which is why they are rare and very valuable. So thank you again for the loan, Tom.
Yes, thank you, man.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say goodnight.
Night, everybody.
Bye, y'all. And to be fair, I might die not getting it all 100% right, but I'm sure as heck going to push it as close as I can.
Maybe, hopefully, you'll inspire someone else to pick up the reins after you're done.
Yeah, so I've become
some other maniac.
I've become the world's preeminent expert on revolver actions by being irritated that nobody else was getting it right, and then I wandered in and went, "Oh my God, no one's ever gotten it right, ever."
I'm not wrong about the 2 people, by the way. I just named. Like, they would be perfect for that adventure.
What's the episode of The Mighty Boosh where it's like, let's just go help Uncle Walt sort his colored pencils? Like, that's what I think of.
I have not seen enough of that show to know that reference, but I'm damn, sorry. That sounds funny.
We need to watch that again.
We do.
The Mighty Boosh was good. I know everybody's thinking of Old Greg, but there are other episodes that are
seriously,
good.
The Springfield Museum up there, Alex McKenzie, is a delight. He gave us extreme access at the very beginning and spoiled us rotten. We love him, and he is our friend.
Yes. Think about it. He's meeting someone who made the video that he and his dad shared together and liked together. So he's like, I'm having a moment with my dad, and the person that made the moment with my dad is here.
Gun show, and
this is
they're
great.
real, they're here, cool.
Right.
Dad, please meet this person. I just shook their hand. He goes to shake my hand. How come you aren't in a bikini? Comes from the old man's mouth. First thing, not even hello, nice to meet you, hi, my name is so and so. No, it's that's his name is. How come you don't wear a bikini when you shoot?
That's when it's finally going to tip, and it's going to eject these two cases. And when they're fitted properly, it's actually quite satisfying. Now, in theory, this guy has a takedown function. I'm actually already engaging it because removing this one screw requires 3 hands.